So our next speaker is Eric Kuhn. He's General Manager of the Colorado River District, and his job tonight is to present the bigger picture that was begged by the last question. A lot of people have probably seen the news about reservoir levels at Powell and Meade and concerned about what is 16 years of drought, and Eric's going to help guide us through what this picture looks like. I do want to point out that the presentations you're seeing tonight will be available on the River District's website, coloradoriverdistrict.org, in a few days. And we're actually taping this presentation, as we do every year, for airing on what's now Channel 191, used to be Channel 12 on the cable network, the government and education channel. So you'll be able to catch up on what you may have missed. So, Eric?
Thank you. Well, again, thank you, and thank you everyone for coming out tonight. It's a great night for that. You guys must have some good binoculars way back there in the back. I have a hard time seeing this from 10 feet away, but anyway, there's still lots of seats, but we'll see. I want to just talk a little bit about the big picture and some of the Colorado River basics and what's happened on the river for the last 15 years, and then what might happen in the future. And of course, I don't have a crystal ball. If I could foretell the future, I wouldn't be in this business. But there are some trends right now, and those trends are troubling. I want to talk first about, here's the Colorado River Basin, as you can see, if I can find my little pointer. It's right down here in southwestern United States. A little bit about the river. It drains about 250,000 square miles. That's about 8% of the 48 continuous states, and it's about half of Alaska. As rivers go, it's a major river when it comes to drainage area, but as flow goes, it is not one of our major rivers. In fact, it has the same flow at the mouth if the water would ever get there. It hasn't got there for years, but if it were untouched by man, the flow at the mouth of the river and the Gulf of Baja California would be about the same as the flow of the Mohawk River in New York City. But of course, the Mohawk River drains about 1/10 of the area of the Colorado River. And the reason that it has such a small, low discharge per square mile is it's high desert, low desert, and about 5 to 10% of the land area is in our mountains, and about 95% of the water that originates on the river comes from a very small area of land above 9,000 feet. And of course, that's where we get the precipitation, that's where we get the snow. The average precipitation is about 10 inches a year, which is about the same here as Grand Junction. I want to point out also the Columbia River. I always say use the Columbia as an example. You know where that is, of course. It starts in Canada and basically Montana and Idaho and flows into the Pacific Northwest. It's the boundary between Washington and Oregon. It also drains about 250,000 square miles. But unlike the Colorado, which has a natural flow at the mouth of somewhere around 15 or 16 million acre feet per year, the Columbia is over 200 million. So for the same drainage area, the Columbia River flows 13 to 15 times as much. So the Colorado River is a limited resource. The other thing we want to point out about the Colorado River is most of the rivers around it are also relatively small. The Rio Grande, basically, it drains desert as well. The Arkansas, until it becomes the Arkansas out there in eastern Kansas, is pretty much a dry river. The Wasatch Front, the rivers that flow into the Salt Lake City, again, are desert rivers. So the rivers that surround it are also dry in terms of flow per acre. So here's the upper basin and the lower basin. Of course, we're in the upper Colorado River Basin. And just to give you an example of the mountains, the Colorado River District, which basically covers from the San Juan Mountains north, we're a small part of the basin. We're about 1/10. We're actually a little more than that, about maybe 11% of the drainage area, but 60 to 65% of the water starts in the river district, and the reason for that is 60 to 70% of the mountains are in the district. There's a few more up in the Wind Rivers, a few in the southwest, the Uintas in Utah. Other than that, we basically have desert, high desert, or low desert. So here's the basin. I also want to point out something that's very fundamental to the river is that it is a regional resource. We've got some cities listed there: Albuquerque, Pueblo, Colorado Springs, Denver. I could say Fort Collins, Loveland, Cheyenne, Salt Lake City, Provo, the Los Angeles metro area, the San Diego metro area, if they consider themselves different. All of those get a major source of their water from the Colorado River. Exports or trans-mountain diversions, they're usually called exports in the rest of the basin, there's nothing different about them in the other states except for, of course, Nevada, because about 90% of the people in Nevada live in Las Vegas, and it gets its water from the Colorado River, which is next to it. And even in Arizona, Phoenix and Tucson are in the Colorado River Basin. Sometimes Arizona doesn't like to acknowledge that, but they are. But we export water from the main stem over 200 miles and deliver about 1.5 million acre feet of water per year through the Central Arizona Project to municipalities, Indian tribes, and agriculture in central Arizona. So that's the big picture on the Colorado River. The basin today, of course, 7 states, 2 countries, 300,000 square miles of a service area. I said 250 of a drainage area. Well, the service area is also the Front Range. So the service area is bigger than the drainage area. There's about 35 million people that are served by the river, 5.5 million acres of irrigated lands, about 1 million in western Colorado. And there's 10 autonomous tribes that abut the river, that actually have lands that are next to the Colorado River. There's another 15 or 20 tribes that are in the basin itself but don't have lands that are next to the Colorado River. What about the basin tomorrow? Well, we own still 7 states, still 300,000, maybe slightly growing. 80 million people. That's the projections that Reclamation used by 2050. That population, most of that increase is in California, even though California will have the slowest growth rate. Arizona will have the highest growth rate, Colorado or Utah next, followed by Colorado. California has the lowest growth rate, but it'll have the most people because it starts with the biggest base. And 4.6 million acres of irrigated lands. So the projection is irrigated lands are going down. It's not because of water, it's because of growth. It's the urbanization of our agricultural lands, which is happening here in western Colorado. I've been at the River District about 35 years, and the Roaring Fork Valley was all working ranches when I first arrived, and today there's a few of them that are in conservation easements, but most of the rest is basically golf courses, and that's the same is true of the Eagle. So there's going to be a loss of about 1 million acres of irrigated lands. A majority of that is actually in the lower basin, and it's almost all due to urbanization, not water supply. The law of the river, of course, we'll get into that in a little bit, but there's the upper basin and the lower basin that was divided by the 1922 compacts. There's 3 major pieces of the law of the river. The first is the 1922 Colorado River Compact. The next is the 1944 treaty with Mexico that covers 3 rivers: the Rio Grande, the Colorado, and the Tijuana, not just the Colorado. And then there's the 1948 Upper Colorado River Basin Compact. And then, of course, there's lots of federal laws and state laws and Supreme Court decrees and those kinds of things. But those are the 3 fundamental planks. So basically, by law, we've allocated 7.5 million to the upper basin if it's there, 7.5 million to the lower basin, an additional million under the compact. It's not true. It wasn't split 50-50 under the compact. The lower basin got 8.5, the upper basin 7.5. And 1.5 million to Mexico. So you add that all up, and there's 17.5 million acre feet on paper. Remember I said the flow of the river, the best estimate right now is around 15 to 16 million acre feet. So there's a basic problem. We've over-allocated the river on paper. But Colorado's not unique. the Platte, the Arkansas, the Rio Grande, the Humboldt, the Bear. I can name another 5 or 10 rivers, and they've all had the same problem. They've been over-allocated on paper. Kind of my view of it as a cynical historian is the easiest way to solve a problem in a negotiation is to give away more than's there, and everybody goes home happy until they figure it out 20 or 30 or 50 years later. And of course, we've talked about the compact. There's an upper basin, a lower basin. The upper basin is actually a tributary area above Lee Ferry. It's about a mile below the confluence of the Paria River and the Colorado River. It's in Arizona, just below Glen Canyon Dam. And there are upper and lower division states. Wyoming, Colorado, New Mexico, and Utah are the upper division states. 2 of those states, Utah and New Mexico, have upper basin and lower basin interests. Utah has the Virgin River, which is a part of the lower basin. Arizona has parts of the Navajo Reservation that are in the upper basin. There's actually more lands in New Mexico in the lower basin than the upper basin, but they're an upper division state because they're basically the Gila River is their lower basin interests. There are 2 things that we need to remember about the compact. What are our obligations as upper division states? There's one, the first is we can't deplete the flows below 75 million over any 10 consecutive years. So that the 10-year period we're in this year is, let's say, is 2006 through 2015. Next year it'll be 2007 through 2016. It's that 10 years keeps going up. The upper basin has always delivered far more than the 75 million. There's also a disputed, the obligation is not disputed. How you calculate the obligation, no one has a clue, but it is regarding Mexico. Both the upper division and the lower division basically lower basin have half of the obligation to Mexico, which is 1.5 million, so 750,000. So how do we operate Lake Powell or Glen Canyon Dam? It's releasing in a typical year what we call 8.23 million acre feet. Well, that just happens to be 75 divided by 10, which is 7.5 million. Half of 1.5 million is 750,000. That's 8.25. Where is the remaining 20,000? Well, the Paria River, which is an upper basin tributary, which comes in below the dam, flows on average 20,000 acre feet, so we deduct that, and the typical release is 8.23. There are lots of uncertainties on the river, and this gets to your question about what's happening in the future. What's the obligation of the upper division states under Article 3, which includes that Mexican treaty and the 75 million? What will the future hydrology look like? There's lots of different climate change analyses. I will say right now, one of my concerns with those climate change analyses is none of them predicted the last 16 years. All of them suggested it would be wetter than it's been. So maybe they're a little bit too optimistic. I don't know. Will it look like paleo? When I say paleo, we've reconstructed the river back really to about the 800s with a gauge called a tree ring. And a tree ring is nothing more than a gauge because you measure the width of the tree ring and you compare it to rivers and you make a correlation, just like if you were to stick a big yardstick in the river and calculate the stage. And we know that in the 1100s, there was a drought that very similar to what we're in right now that lasted almost 60 years. And also there's lots of archaeological evidence that there was a lot of disruption in the native peoples at that time. So there's a lot of other evidence that the Colorado River has historically seen droughts that are significant, more significant than what we experienced in the 1900s. In fact, most of us who have looked at that long-term record have suggested that the 1900s were unique. They were probably the wettest 100-year century that the Colorados had since the 800s. There's some others that were close, like the 1700s, but it was probably the wettest. And the droughts that we had, the 30s, the 50s, those were significant droughts for us, but they were relatively small compared to some of the bigger ones we've had in the past. Basic trade-off. This is where we get into policy issues that we're talking about today at the state level, and there was a good editorial in the Sentinel just a few days ago. But existing water users, the Grand Junctions, the Glenwood Springs, the Grand Valley Irrigation District, the Grand Valley Irrigation Company, Uncompahgre Valley, the Vail Associates for their snowmaking. Existing users desire certainty. That's why you want to, if you're delivering raw water, or if you're delivering treated water to your residents that you want, that have you water accounts, you want to make sure the water's there when they need it. So water planning is all about providing certainty. Well, what's a threat to that certainty? One of the biggest threats to that certainty is a compact obligation problem. A compact, we call it a curtailment. It's nothing other than, when a senior user on Plateau Creek puts a call on an upstream junior. Well, the lower basin has been interpreted has a senior right to 75 million because of Article 3C. So a curtailment will cause uncertainty, and if you have post-compact rights, and I'll get into that in a second, you're very concerned about that. So the Denvers of the world, but not just the Denvers, the Vails, well, Glenwood Springs is a bad example, they're pretty compact, but lots of cities on the West Slope are post-compact, as are power plants like the Craig Station. So the higher the level of development, so we want certainty as water providers, but we also want development. But the problem is the more development you have, the less certainty you have. So it's going to have to be a trade-off between how much risk are you willing to accept, because more development means we're going to be using more water. In a dry period, we could be in trouble in meeting our obligations. The more we use, and that's a 10-year obligation, so you got to go back 9 years. So a new project that might divert 50,000 acre-feet a year, which is a big project, let's say 5,000 acre-feet, over a 10-year period could have an impact on our obligation by 50,000 acre-feet. So it's cumulative. So that's one of the issues that we're dealing with now in the State Water Plan. And it's one of the issues that I've been pushing hard on the West Slope to say, and the East Slope, let's understand the risk of additional development, especially of a big transbound diversion, on existing users. And I think we've made now I notice that folks like Denver Water and even Northern are saying, and if there's a new project that's going to divert water from the East Slope, it can only do it if it doesn't hurt us. They're not rooting for it. They're saying, let's put qualifications on it. So we've really changed the dialogue through this roundtable process on this question of risk. Finally, I want to point out, and this is really important to the Grand Valley, pre-compact uses. What are pre-compact uses? Those that were in existence, not water rights, uses that were in existence prior to 1922. And why did I say water right? A water right is something the court gave you as evidence of your use. Well, if you started using water in 1920 but didn't go to court till 1925, you still have a pre-compact use. If you had a conditional right in 1915 and you didn't use it till 1960, you don't have a pre-compact use. You have a post-compact use. But pre-compact uses, and this is a property right issue, they understood water rights really well in 1922. And that is that the compact could not change the water rights that people had. So basically, Article 8 of the 1922 compact says that all pre-compact uses are unimpaired. So if you have a water right, like the Grand Valley Irrigation Company, goes back to 1880s, or the Grand Valley Water Users Association, the early 1900s, those water rights are not subject to a curtailment because they're pre-compact. Now, however, if you're a Ute Water and you divert for the 1948 right, so your lawn may be in good shape, but you may not be able to drink, it may not have anything to deliver for potable water. But anyway, that's the same situation I'm in. My system has a very junior water for in-house use, but a senior right for irrigation use. That's just the way it came. So anyway, we got to remember that. And that the other problem we have on the river is this prior appropriation system. It is alive and well on the Colorado River. And it's alive and well in the lower basin and the upper basin. You know why Arizona, the Central Arizona Project, and Nevada are taking the shortages in the lower basin? Because they have the junior rights. Why is the Imperial Irrigation District? Some of our folks saw that. I mean, it's 500,000 acres of a 365-day-a-year growing season where they get 12 crops of alfalfa a year if they want. Why do they have better rights than Los Angeles? Because they're senior. So that gets into the certainty issue again. The municipalities have the most junior rights on the river, upper basin and lower basin, east slope and west slope, and agriculture has the senior rights. I'm setting up your next discussion. Long-term questions, hydrology. If we overuse it, what's the problem? You know, we can look at overuse. There are lots of places where we overuse the supply. Not in the Colorado River in the upper basin yet, but in the lower basin, California did, and they had to cut back. How did they cut back? The municipalities went to irrigation. In the Pecos River and in the Rio Grande River, they overused. What did they do? They went to irrigation, and they went. There are two common losers when you overuse water, and people is not one of them. Agriculture and the environment are the two common users. And look at the Grand Valley and say, what are some of the most important things that make us here in western Colorado, not just the Grand Valley, but Glenwood Springs as well, important? It's our environment, it's our recreation economy, and it's our agriculture. So those are at risk if we overuse things. So what's the future of agriculture? And how do we govern this river in the future? Here I already mentioned that the current uses right now on the river, if you add them all up, including Mexico, are about 16 to 17.5 million. This includes the lower basin tributaries. The basin study that the Bureau of Reclamation did, I like to call it a 3/4 of a study because it excluded the Gila River for political reasons. And the Gila provides about 5% of the water, but it drains about 25% of the river, so it's about 3/4 of a basin. Hydrology comparison, this is 2000 to 2014, and this is going to be about the same in 2015. And this is natural flow at Lee Ferry, and what natural flow is, if there was just one person in the whole basin and that person's job was to read the gauge, this is what the flow would be. It's about a little over 12 million in the last 15 years. I'd say it's going to be about 12 million in over the last 16 years. Since 1988, it's about 13 million. Climate change, well, it was 13.7. That's why I'm saying maybe the climate change is a little too optimistic. The gauge record was just short of 15. And then if you look at the 1100s, there was about a 50-year period where it was somewhere between 12 and 13 million acre feet. So you can see this is where we are. This is at Lee Ferry. Add another 3/4 of a million for the lower basin. So if we have a demand on the system of 15 and we're providing 13, we're running a deficit of about 2 million acre feet per year. And that's exactly what's happened. The supply in the last 15 years now, actually 16 years, has been about 13 million if you include the lower basin tributaries. Our uses are about 15 million. This is ignoring the Gila because none of that water gets to the main stem anyway. So we run a deficit of about 2 million acre feet. Well, how can we live with a deficit of 2 million acre feet a year? We have 60 million acre feet of storage on the system. Back in 1999, Lakes Mead and Lake Powell were almost 99, not quite 99, but 97% full. They had 50 million acre feet of water in them. Today, the projection to the end of this year is they'll have about 18 million acre feet in them. So we've dropped 32 million acre feet in 16 years. The math is pretty simple. 32 divided by 16 is about 2 million acre feet. So the real question on the river is, can we continue that? Yeah, we can continue it for a few more years. But can we continue it for 5 more years? Probably not. Can we continue it for 10 more years? No. You really can't drain those reservoirs for a number of reasons. One, power generation is a very significant one. It's just the system will not, even long before we'll have a compact problem, we'll get to a problem where we're draining reservoirs and everyone will get together and all the governors, Republican or Democrat, it won't make any difference what your political stripes are. You're going to say, we just can't afford to drain a big reservoir that's supposed to have 25 million acre feet in it down to nothing. Las Vegas can't deliver water to 2 million people because they have a pumping system that comes in at 1,000. They have a tap at the bottom of the reservoir, but it'll take them another 7 to 10 years and $1 billion to put a pump in at the bottom. So they've got the ability to tap into the water, but they don't have a pump in. So we just can't drain reservoirs down to the bottom. So basically what we've done in the last couple of years is we've said, what do we do if we continue to draw these reservoirs down? Now, I'm actually pretty optimistic. I'm thinking next year is going to be a big year. It started in May. I'll show you that in a minute. But if I'm wrong, we really need to have a contingency plan in place. We need to understand what we're doing. Here's a little bit about the hydrology. Here's the Lake Powell group. You can see what happened. And just ignore what people say about percentages during the decline, during the runoff period, because percentages don't mean much. What really counts is how much water was under the curve here. And you can see we peaked in early March, and things were really dry. March and April were quite dry. But we've recovered a little bit because we've had a lot of rain. I've had 3.5 inches of rain at my house in May alone. I've had 6.5 for the whole year, although I don't really trust my gauge. It's not great with snow. Fort Morgan, the CWCB just met. I was at the CWCB meeting yesterday. Fort Morgan has had almost 11 inches of rain in May alone. And we're expected to have some generally wet conditions for at least another week, maybe another 2 weeks, but then dry out. So this May has really been a miracle in Colorado with respect to our demands. So here's some of you can see lousy snowpack overall, but better recently. Same thing with this is the Dotsero group. This is basically above Glenwood Springs. Here's the San Juan. The San Juan was almost gone until May, and then they've actually had some decent snow, but primarily above 10,000 feet. And most of these snowtails are above 10,000 feet. That's where you've seen it. So, but it'll result in more runoff. And here's the Yampa. The farther north you get, the drier things have been. The 3 inches that I've had is a little less in Craig. And it's even lesser it's even lower than that up in Wyoming. So basically, the farther north you go, the drier it's been in May, but still okay. And here's something interesting. This is the official. Well, this isn't the official. This is the model that shows the expected runoff into Lake Powell. And back here in November, when they start it, you can see that before there's any snow, they have a huge range from a low of here to a high of here. This is average. These were the official forecasts. They were close to average in January, dropped in February, about the same in March. Big drop in April, another big drop in May. But I expect by the time we get to June, we'll be back about where we were in April. We could see an additional 1 million to 1.5 million acre feet of inflow into Powell based on what we've seen in May alone. Now, if we have a dry June and July, will it continue to drop down? Maybe not so much. But even if we get another 1.5 million acre feet of inflow into Powell out of May, we're still only going to be about 60% of average. So the bottom line is 2016 is another dry year, just as Ryan said. Lake Powell may not go down as much as we feared 3 weeks ago, but it's still going to drop in storage, as is Lake Mead. What the states are looking at right now is what we're calling contingency planning. Contingent on what? Well, contingent upon this drought continuing. So we don't want to have a fight in 3 years, 3 months before we know we have to do something to preserve reservoir levels. We want to be talking about that now when we have more level heads and nobody's running to court and those kinds of things. So the secretary met with the representatives of the 7 states, and there was a consensus among all 8 of them that said we have to have a plan in place, lower basin and upper basin, so that if the drought continues, we know basically what we're going to do. We've thought about it ahead of time. And that's smart planning. I mean, what municipality doesn't do contingency planning for those kinds of things? Well, it's never been done in the Colorado as a basin as a whole, but it's about time. So the goal is to identify actions that can reduce the probability of losing power production or being unable to deliver water, basically draining the reservoirs. The solutions, we're going to aggressively operate those upstream reservoirs. We're calling it extended operations. Flaming Gorge, how many have heard of Flaming Gorge? It's a big reservoir, 4 million acre feet. It hardly moves. It just kind of goes down a little bit in the drought, up a little bit in the wet period. But if we need to, we're going to move water from Flaming Gorge down to Powell. The power users insist on that because each acre foot at Powell produces 4 times, actually 5 times as much power as an acre foot at Flaming Gorge. So if you're going to put a water behind a dam, do you want it behind Flaming Gorge or do you want it behind Powell? The answer is obvious. You want it behind Powell. Demand management. What's demand management? That means controlling our consumptive uses. And that's what the next group of folks are going to talk about. Demand management is, electrical companies do it. How do they do it? They do rolling brownouts. Well, we don't see that much in the United States, but in other countries it's quite common. Demand management means reducing our uses. That we've never talked about in Colorado. It's always been, how are we going to increase our uses? Just how are we going to add water, as someone said? How are we going to develop more? What's the next creek we're going to dam? Now we're talking about who's going to cut back how much if we need to. That's a paradigm shift. And finally, we're doing augmentation. We're doing a lot of cloud seeding and other things. Not so much in Colorado. There was a little bit, if you didn't follow it, there was a little bit of a legislative flap over it. There's some folks that believe cloud seeding over here is stealing somebody's clouds on the other side of the mountain. It's, I don't know whether they're right or they're wrong, but cloud seeding has been shown that it, at least at the local level, will increase snowpack. Grand Junction does it. Grand Mesa does it. We do it in Vail. We do it in lots of places on the West Slope. And hopefully we're going to do more of it because as a cost is very low, and even if it only gives us half as much as we think it will, then it's still worth the investment because it's still $10, $15, $20 per acre foot at most. So there's that. Here's the main stem, Upper Basin. Here was Flaming Gorge. You can see Morrow Point, Blue Mesa, Navajo, Glen Canyon are the big ones. Any questions, thoughts, comments, darts, balloons? Yes, sir.
How do the dynamics between Lake Powell and Mead work? In other words, is more water, like you're saying, they build up in Powell? Was that just automatically sent down to Mead, or was Powell priority? They build it up, how does that work?
Yeah, great question. The question was, how do the dynamics between Powell and Mead work? Again, for up until 2002 or 2003, they were sort of operated independently, kind of like Flaming Gorge is operated independent of Powell, and we just delivered 8.23 million acre feet. If it was a low year and if there was a lot of water, they'd just spill. Okay, so it was up until the early 2000s, it was operated without really thinking about the two reservoirs together. The beginning in 2002, the basin states, of which Colorado was a party to, and which Colorado was a major player in, quite frankly, and the Bureau of Reclamation negotiated what's called the interim operating criteria, interim shortage criteria for the lower basin, and interim operating criteria for Lake Powell and Lake Mead. We still got to deal with that 823 on average, but it allows us to go a little bit above 823 in some years and a little bit below in others. And this basically shows that there's sort of a complex, it's not real complicated, but you look at both levels and you say, does it make sense to have a lot more water in Mead than Powell? No. So the bottom line is they try to keep the levels the same as they go up and down, but with a recognition that we can't deliver much more than 823 out of Lake Powell on a long-term average because then we get into compact problems. So the interim guidelines, and they're called interim because they're only good through 2025, they were actually approved by all 7 states. Actually, it's been a while. Governor Owens was in place when Colorado approved the interim guidelines. So there is a set formula as to how much water is released from Powell. Next year, last month we thought we were going to deliver 748 next year. I think with this extra water, it'll kick it up to 8.23 or 9 because of May. So we actually look at where things are. One of the problems that I see on the basin is in the lower basin, because of the bigger demands on the system and quite frankly, the politics and the California drought, they're not going to make as much progress as we'd hoped in reducing their demand. So Lake Mead's going to keep going down and down and down, even if we deliver slightly more than 8.23 million, and that could create a political problem a couple of years down the road. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
My understanding is we owe, well, let's put it this way, the lower basin has a priority right on 7.5.
On 75 over 10.
Okay. The question is, if there's only 7,500
Or 75 million over 10.
75 million acre feet, does it all go there?
The question was, if there's only 75 million in the upper basin in a 10-year period, does it all go to the lower basin? All of the post-compact rights water would go to the lower basin. But all of the those pre-compact rights are not subject to curtailment under a different article in the compact. So Colorado uses about 2.5 million acre feet per year. About half of that is post-compact, about half of that is pre-compact. Almost all the Transbasin diversions are post-compact. So we would be using, instead of using 2.5 million acre feet, we'd have to learn to live with 1.2 million acre feet. And that would be tough. And the other problem is 99.2% of that 1.2 million acre feet of pre-compact rights is probably in agriculture. Now, this is Grand Junction has some pre-compact rights. Glenwood Springs does. Some others do, but they're not large. They're largely not consumptive. But that's a good question. Remember, I said the 75 is an obligation with our post-compact uses. Yes.
What about our irrigation rights here in Colorado? I mean, in Grand Junction. Like when I bought my house, I thought I had to share.
Yes.
I'm just wondering, do you think there's a possibility that we won't be able to water our lawns with our irrigation water?
The question is there a possibility you won't be able to water your lawns with irrigation water? Not in Grand Junction, because, as I said, most of those Grand Junction rights, I'm really not aware of any post-compact rights that are irrigation in the Grand Junction area. Yeah, you may not be able to flush your toilet, but you'll be able to water your lawn. And that's the problem. That's the problem with the system, is that the irrigation rights were here long before the people were. So they have the senior rights. Yes, sir.
Well, if that happened, don't you think the water courts would change the right?
The question is, if that happened, do you think a water court would change the right? No, I don't think a water court would. I think there would be tremendous pressure by the governor on folks to come together and reach a solution. And then there is this, and this we need to be candid about this. Municipalities and industrial users, whether they're private or municipal, have a right to condemn. So there would probably be threats for condemnation of agricultural uses. That's not an easy process. Condemnation of anything is not an easy process, especially a water right. So that would, I imagine we would all be working on alternatives to doing that. But condemnation has happened. Grand Junction has condemned lots of water rights in its past, in its distant past. So condemnation is a source, as is municipalities. There's more condemnation of water for private companies than there is for municipalities. Private companies under our Constitution can condemn water for industrial purposes. So for like a power plant or a pipeline, something like that. But that goes back to Colorado's Constitution in the 1870s. Yes, ma'am.
So I've heard that Lake Powell also has sediment
Good. The question is sediment problems. It does, but it's not it's a lot of sediment, but it's a big, big reservoir. The reservoir was built with a capacity of about 25.8 million. They reduced the size to what, Ryan, like 24.3 or 24.5. So it's in 50 years, it's lost about 1 million acre feet of capacity. So in another 50 years, if it loses another million, go from 24 to 23, it will take a long time. It'll ultimately fill up with sediment, but it'll take a long time to do so. The bigger sediment problems are at the upper end of the reservoir where when you drain it down, you get lots of sloughing and it's ugly. I'm not sure it's any kind of problem unless you're a rafter or something, but there's sufficient capacity in Lake Powell to operate that reservoir as it's currently operated with the inflow of sediment for a long time. Questions? It's right back here, right?
Are evaporative losses from Powell and the reservoir, do they count for in the water balance provisions the last 15 years?
The question is, does evaporation count in the water balance? Yes, it does. Evaporation is very big in the Colorado River Basin. Remember I said there's about 15 million acre feet of total water supply available. Almost 15 to 20% of the water used in the basin goes to evaporation. It's over 1 million acre feet in the lower basin, and it's in the 500,000 acre feet in the upper basin. That's just in Powell and Meade and Havasu, and then you add in the other reservoirs, and it's another 300,000-400,000. So reservoir evaporation does count in the water balance. There's a little nuance here. In the upper basin, because we have a compact, it counts as a consumptive use. And the reservoir evaporation on Wolford Mountain counts as an evaporation loss to the use by Colorado. Grand Junction's reservoirs, it counts as a use. It doesn't yet count as a use in the lower basin because of decree accounting, so there's differences between the lower basin, but it's in the water balance. You can't ignore it. It's a major source of use. I'm counting that as a use, yes.
One more question?
One more question, and then we'll turn it over to the really talented panel. Yes?
Is there any accounting for use of groundwater in the basin and its effect on spring flow?
The question is there a use of accounting for use of groundwater in the basin? There's some, but it's very limited, especially in the upper basin. They're getting it much, they're doing a lot of that in the lower basin because of the alluvial kind of conditions you have on the Colorado and the Gila or the Little Colorado and the Gila, but there's not a lot of that in the upper basin. But we do know, I think the USGS has just recently put out some work that about half of the flow of the Colorado River, and from October 1 to September 30, originates as groundwater at some point in the system, whether it's in the whether it's an alluvial groundwater source or a deeper groundwater source in the Grand Canyon. And the USGS has done recently some really good work on how old that groundwater is and what those impacts are. And we're starting to see impacts to base flows throughout the system because of the dry conditions we've seen in the last 15 or 16 years, especially in places like the Grand Canyon.
Great. Thank you, Eric.
Thanks.